last video, we talked about fear being a mechanism of control, and not just necessarily control, but also a fundamental shift in how societies function, what laws are passed, what legislation is allowed, and I also said that there is a completely different side of the coin that governments and people can use to manipulate others, and that would be pleasure. Now, the interesting thing is that there is essentially two different philosophies when it comes to dystopian thought. One part of dystopian thought can be the big brother aspect, but an entirely different part can be the pleasure aspect. So today, we're going to dive into both of them. Welcome to the battleground between two competing visions of tyranny, both written nearly a century ago, and both kind of coming true right now. On one side, George Orwell's nightmare of jackboots and surveillance, where an iron-fisted government controls you through fear and pain. On the other side, Aldous Huxley's vision of a soft prison made of pleasure, where you are controlled not by what you hate, but by what you love. And the question that has been debated for decades is which one got it right, and which mechanism works better. But here's what I want to argue today. We are not choosing between these two futures. We are living in both of them simultaneously. And the scarier one, the one that's harder to fight, might not be the obvious tyranny of Big Brother. Instead, it is the invisible cage built from dopamine hits and endless entertainment. So let's start with what these two men actually predicted. George Orwell published his book 1984 in the year 1949, fresh off these horrors of World War I and watching Stalin's Soviet Union tighten its grip. And his vision was brutally straightforward: a totalitarian superstate called Oceania, where the party controls everything through surveillance and terror. There are telescreens in every room, broadcasting propaganda while simultaneously watching you. There's a Ministry of Truth that rewrites history. And there's Newspeak, a language designed to make dissent impossible by eliminating the words that you would need to express them. And then there is Room 101, where the thought police torture you with your worst fears until you genuinely believe that 2 + 2 = 5. It's a world where, as Orwell put it, if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Control through pain, fear, and the constant threat of violence. Now, contrast that with Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, published in 1932. Huxley imagined something far more insidious. In his future, people are not beaten into submission, but they're bred for it. Society is genetically engineered into a caste system, with alphas at the top and epsilons at the very bottom. Everyone designed and conditioned from birth to love their designated role. There's no need for thought police because nobody wants to think critically in the first place. And if anyone does feel a twinge of discontent, there's soma, a happy drug with all the advantages of Christianity and alcohol, with none of the defects. Do you feel sad, anxious, or that maybe there is something profoundly wrong with how you're living your life? Just take some soma and forget about it. But soma is not the only mechanism of control. There's also sex. Unlimited, consequence-free, and explicitly encouraged by the state. Everyone belongs to everyone else is drilled into the citizens from childhood. Monogamy is considered obscene, and deep emotional bonds are dangerous. So people are kept in a constant state of shallow gratification, never forming the kinds of connections that might lead them to question the system. And then there is the entertainment. what Huxley called the feelies, an immersive sensory experience that are all stimulation and no substance, nonstop distractions of the most fascinating nature, drowning people in what he describes as a sea of irrelevance. The rest is essentially a painless concentration camp, a society where people genuinely enjoy their servitude because they don't realize or even care that they are slaves to pleasure. Now, let's look at this in modern context. In 1985, media theorist Neil Postman published a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And in the introduction, he laid out the difference between these two visions with brutal clarity. And I quote, "In 1984, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us, but Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us." Postman's entire argument was that Huxley had won the prophecy contest, that by 1985, America was not sliding into Orwellian totalitarianism, but instead it was amusing itself into Huxleyan submission. And his primary target was television. He argued that TV had fundamentally transformed public discourse by turning everything from politics to religion into a form of entertainment. The medium itself, he claimed, could not sustain rational argument or complex thought. It demanded performance, spectacle, and amusement. A modern presidential debate with 8 candidates forced to answer policy questions in 30 seconds or less and constantly interrupted by commercial breaks. Politics are reduced to sound bites and zingers, where the goal is not to convince through reason, but to capture attention through theatrics. Postman called this disinformation, or misplaced, irrelevant, fragmented, or superficial information that creates the illusion of knowing something, but which in fact leads one away from knowing. But Postman was writing in 1985, before the internet, smartphones, and social media. If he thought TV was bad, he could not have imagined what was coming. So let's talk about how your brain works, just for a second, because understanding this is crucial to understanding why you can't put your phone down anymore. Your brain loves dopamine, which has led many people associating dopamine with pleasure. But dopamine isn't actually the pleasure chemical per se. It's the anticipation chemical. Dopamine spikes not when you get the reward, but when you are expecting the reward. When you add everything into your shopping cart on Amazon and go through the steps of ordering, your dopamine spikes. But as soon as you do order, it goes back down immediately. So, dopamine is what motivates you to seek out things that might be good for you, like food, social connection, and novelty. The system evolved to keep us alive. When you found food or made a useful social connection, dopamine reinforced that behavior so you would do it again. But social media companies have figured out how to weaponize it. Every time you get a like, a comment, or notification, your brain releases a little hit of dopamine. And because you never know exactly when that reward is coming, your brain stays in a state of heightened anticipation. This is called variable reinforcement, and it's the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. The unpredictability makes it more compelling, and the design is absolutely intentional. Think about the features. Infinite scrolling that eliminates any natural stopping point. Notifications designed to create unpredictable rewards. Streaks that punish you for breaking the chain. And autoplay that keeps the content flowing without your input. All of this is carefully calibrated to keep you engaged as long as humanly possible. And the worst part is that over time, this constant dopamine flooding actually changes your brain. You develop tolerance, and you need more engagement to get that same reward. Meanwhile, your ability to experience pleasure from normal activities decreases. Reading a book is boring. Having a conversation feels less rewarding than checking your phone because you've been trained to crave that quick hit over the slow burn. Desire, induced by endless feeds, seeking and anticipating rewards through likes and comments, which then triggers more desire. The brain actually prunes neurons to make this reward pathway faster and more efficient, which can lead to impulsivity and difficulty controlling emotional responses. Does this sound like Brave New World yet to you? Because it should. Social media is soma. But let's zoom out from the individual brain to the collective level. There is a concept called the attention economy, which treats human attention as a scarce commodity that can be bought, sold, and traded. And in this economy, you are not the customer. You're the product. Your attention is what is being sold to advertisers. But what makes this really dangerous is that attention is not just about where you're looking. It's about your will. Philosopher William James wrote in 1890 that the effort of attention is the essential phenomenon of will. In other words, what you pay attention to shapes what you care about, what you believe, and what you're capable of doing. So when we talk about the attention economy compromising the human will, we're not being metaphorical. We're talking about the foundation of democracy itself. Because democracies are supposed to be based on the will of the people. But what happens when that will has been systematically fragmented, distracted, and redirected towards whatever generates the most engagement? Because in the attention economy, what gets attention is not what's most important or even the truest thing. It's about what is most emotionally provocative, most shocking, and most entertaining. We are living in a state of perpetual distraction that is eroding our capability to think deeply about anything. One researcher described it as technology having crowded out opportunities for reflection and replaced leisure with entertainment. When we can't focus long enough to think clearly about our own values and priorities, and every moment of potential reflection is filled with notifications and feeds, we lose the capacity for self-governance. And a society that is incapable of focusing is incapable of democratic deliberation. Just look at China's social credit system. It's pure synthesis. You've got the Orwellian surveillance, cameras everywhere using facial recognition, tracking every movement, and monitoring every transaction. But you've also got the Huxleyan awards. Earn enough points, and you get perks like easier travel, better hotel access, and dating advantages. The system uses both the stick and the carrot, pain and pleasure. Or look at the West. We have unprecedented surveillance capabilities. Every click is tracked, every search is logged, and every location is recorded. That's Orwell. But it's also an opt-in. Most of it is voluntary, all wrapped in the language of convenience and personalization. And that is Huxley. We are being watched, but we're also being entertained. We're losing privacy, but we're gaining the dopamine. Newer institutions tend to mix and match, exercising a complementary hard and soft politics. And here's the thing Orwell understood. He was familiar with Huxley's argument and didn't dismiss it. In fact, he saw the pleasure-based society as a potential stage that would create the perfect conditions for harder tyranny to take over. A population that has been weakened by hedonism and lost its capability for sustained resistance is ripe for authoritarian takeover. Maybe all we're missing to slide fully into 1984 is that one major crisis. And if I had to choose which dystopia is scarier, I'd definitely go with Huxley's. Because Orwellian control is obvious. When the government breaks down your door, you know you're being oppressed. And when they torture you, there is no ambiguity about what's happening. But Huxleyan control is invisible. It feels like freedom and choice. You're not being forced to scroll Instagram for 3 hours. You're choosing to. The question Huxley raised was, to what extent are these things intentionally pushed upon us? And to what extent are they spontaneous responses to what we genuinely want? And the answer is, it's probably a little bit of both. We want the pleasure and the distraction, but the system has just figured out how to give us exactly what we want in exactly the way that keeps us coming back, but also benefits them. Orwell's dystopia creates rebels because pain creates resistance. But Huxley's dystopia creates compliance because who rebels against pleasure and fights against their own desires? But we're not powerless. These futures were warnings, not inevitabilities. They wrote these books specifically so we might avoid them. But the question is whether we're paying attention. Not to our phones or our feeds or the next video on the autoplay queue, but to the actual stakes, to what we are trading away. Because freedom is not just the absence of obvious chains, it is the presence of genuine choice. And if you can't choose freely, if your attention is being manipulated or your dopamine is being hijacked, your will is fragmented into 1,000 micro distractions. And the true question is, do we have the will to look away from the screen long enough to actually do something about it? So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see y'all next time.